Earlier, we traveled to William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, to talk to Robert Gates, who is chancellor at the school. We began by asking him for his thoughts on Donald Trump.
Well, I have some real issues with things he said about national security policy and some concerns. I think there are some contradictions. You can't have a trade war with China and then turn around and ask them to help you on North Korea. I have no idea what his policy would be in terms of dealing with ISIS. I worry a little bit about his admiration for Vladimir Putin.
You've served 8 presidents. Are these the kinds of reservations that can be, are these policy position issues, or can they be fixed with a good staff?
And they're policy positions, so they can always change. I mean, I've seen presidents do that more than once. I guess one of the things that makes it challenging for me is that he seems to think that he has all the answers and that he doesn't need any advice from staff or anybody else, and that he knows more about these things than anybody else, and doesn't really feel the need to surround himself with informed advisors. You know, I worked for some very different presidents of those 8. You know, people would say, how could you work for both Barack Obama and George W. Bush? And I remind them, well, I worked for Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. The difference is each one of those presidents, as strong-minded as each of them was, understood he did not have all the answers and surrounded himself with experienced, thoughtful people who would give good advice, and they were willing to listen. They would often make their own independent judgments. They often would act contrary to the advice they were receiving. But nonetheless, they only acted after they had listened to different points of view and then had the opportunity to make up their mind.
Is that a fatal flaw?
I think that one would have to show between now and the election, it seems to me, that you were willing to do that. And willing to listen to people, willing to adjust your positions, to give any sense of confidence that, you know, I come into all this from the national security standpoint, and that's what I look at. I came to this interview from commissioning 18 brand new second lieutenants coming out of ROTC, and I think about all those young people in the military and who's going to be in charge of them. Who's going to be in a position to give them orders. And so I want to see some evidence that a person can be trusted with the lives of those young people.
Would you serve him if he asked?
Well, I learned a long time ago never to say never, but let's just say that would be inconceivable to me. Before the election, I will be 73, and let's just say I've stopped working on my resume.
But let's say you were a young Bach of 63. Would you? would it be an administration you could see yourself serving?
Well, I think there would have to be a conversation with the candidate to see. You know, when President-elect Obama asked me to stay on, we did something very unusual. We had this secret meeting in the firehouse at Reagan Airport in Washington, and I had sent him 10 questions, you know, and beginning with, why do you think you can trust me? And what are your positions on Afghanistan and the defense budget? And who's the rest of the team going to be? No matter what age I might be, those are questions that I think would have to be asked.
We'll have a lot more of our conversation with Secretary Gates later in the broadcast. And we're back with more of our conversation with former Defense Secretary Robert Gates.
You talked about how important it is to have somebody on your staff who tells you no as a president. There has been, in the New York Times Magazine, there was a profile of Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor. There's a lot of talk about that in Washington. Is his relationship with Barack Obama typical in your experience?
Well, I think every president has advisors with whom they have a very special relationship. And particularly, though, when it comes to substantive matters, those advisors tend to be very senior and very experienced. For example, there was an extraordinarily close relationship between the first President Bush and his national security advisor, Brent Scowcroft. I think I had a very close relationship with Bush 41 as Deputy National Security Advisor, sort of the same level position that Mr. Rhodes has. So I think that all presidents have those relationships with people that they can trust and people they can be themselves around, people they can let their hair down, say what they really think about somebody. The question is how much influence they have on the policymaking process and whether at the same time they're listening to the senior cabinet officers and others that they've appointed, presumably in whose judgment they also trust.
There has been criticism of the Obama administration that they block or shape or try to shape the views of senior cabinet officials, and there's too much control by the NSC. Did you experience that in your days?
No, I never had that problem, mainly because I just didn't let them. And it's mainly staff. The president always, I found President Obama very welcoming of honest and candid points of view. He and I would have some very direct conversations in private, and he more often than not would end them, and sometimes we disagreed very strongly, and he would end them by standing up, smiling, and saying, "Are you sure I can't get you to stay another year?" So I think...
Was he being facetious, or did he like the back and forth?
No, I think he welcomed it. I think he found it of value. He obviously didn't decide my way all the time by any means, but I'm not sure how many people there are left in the administration at this point who are willing to have direct issues with him like that. I just don't know.
One of the conclusions some have drawn in reading that article about the Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, is that he shaped the environment for the Iran deal, that he misled the public. Did you see that from your observation of the Iran deal and it's being sold by the White House?
Well, I didn't have that sense. I thought some of the things the White House was saying in terms of believing that lifting the sanctions could over time lead the regime in Iran to change its stripes and become a normal country, if you will. I always thought that was a stretch, but I didn't have the sense that people were being manipulated. That was news to me from that article.
In that article, you are a part of what Rhodes calls the blob of the American foreign policy establishment. What does that mean to you?
The thing that struck me, and because there was also this kind of disdainful reference to the foreign policy establishment in an earlier interview that the president gave. And what intrigued me about it is the notion that the blob all has one point of view. I mean, the blob presumably includes Brent Scowcroft, who was deeply opposed to the Iraq war. It presumably includes me. I was deeply opposed to the intervention in Libya. It presumably includes George Shultz, who's argued for getting rid of nuclear weapons, along with Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense. So the blob is as diverse in its points of view as any group of people around. The one thing that members of that elite group have in common is experience. And some of them have given bad advice. Some of us have given bad advice in the past. Some of us have given pretty good advice. But to lump everybody together and say, and really the candidates kind of do that, and to say, I don't need those people, I don't want those people, is to dismiss an awful lot of experience and a very great diversity of views on the challenges we face and how to deal with them.
The president's characterization of that establishment was that the reaction to any event anywhere else is always kind of the president has to act and act militarily.
Well, and the irony in that is I opposed the intervention in Libya. I mean, my reaction in the Situation Room was, during those debates, can I just finish the 2 wars we're already in before you go looking for a third one? So again, I think that there is this sort of political shorthand of lumping people together that really doesn't make any sense and frankly is a disservice.
The president in that Atlantic article also said that he was proud of his decision not to take military action against Syria, the so-called red line moment. Other people have a different view. Is that something the president should be proud of, his decision not to act?
I would separate that into 2 questions. Should he have laid down the red line in the first place? and having laid down a red line, or whether or not he laid down a red line, should he have taken military action. First of all, I believe that, and always cautioned, that presidents should be extraordinarily careful about issuing ultimatums or drawing red lines, because when the President of the United States does that, the rest of the world must know it is fatal to cross it. That when the United States makes a threat, it is not an empty threat. That said, so I don't think he should have ever made the threat in the first place, and I would have counseled him against it. Whether he should have used air power early on to either create safe havens or to ground Assad's air force, I think that's a debatable point. Should we send significant numbers of American combat forces into Syria? I would say absolutely not, and I agreed with him on that point.
How different do you think Hillary Clinton's worldview is than Barack Obama's?
Well, you know, they're as much as, or as to the extent that I've watched the debates and the commentary and so on, I haven't, frankly, seen a lot of discussion about foreign policy on the Democratic side. It was my experience in working with her that she was very tough-minded. And for example, when General McChrystal was asking for 40,000 additional troops in Afghanistan, she was very tough in support of what the general wanted. She also was an advocate for going into Libya. So I suspect, although we have not had a conversation since I left in almost 5 years, I would suspect that generally speaking, she is more hawkish than President Obama.
Do you think with Hillary Clinton that politics gets in the way of her judgment?
I did not. All I can say is that in the 2.5 years that we worked together, I never saw that.
You mentioned in your book, in Duty, though, you mentioned that she said that her opposition to the surge during George W. Bush's administration was political.
Well, senators have the luxury of taking positions because they have no responsibility. And and as I've said, I think that I was startled by that, but I never saw her take that position in the 2.5 years. I never saw her in that 2.5 years let domestic politics influence her recommendations to the president or her positions in the Situation Room.
You think she can handle the job of the president?
Yeah, again, I think it also depends in her case. Who is she going to surround herself with? And what are the policy options she's going to pursue? What would be her alternatives in places like Syria and with ISIS, and how to deal with Putin and the Chinese and so on? And we just haven't heard much of that.
Secretary Gates, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
And we wanted to note that Ben Rhodes is the brother of CBS News President David Rhodes.